How the last true hermit survived almost 30 years living in the woods. Imagine you own a vacation home in rural Maine. You hear legends of a mythical creature that lurks in the shadows and breaks into people's homes. Suddenly you notice there's food missing from your pantry. Then some of your clothes are gone. Although there's no proof of a break-in, you can't help but feel that something's wrong. This is the sort of terror that the residents of North Pond lived in for 27 years. But that's also the way the last true hermit managed to survive alone in the woods for so long. Watch on to learn about who the hermit really was. In the late 80s, something strange was happening to the community of North Pond, Maine. Residents found batteries missing from flashlights and certain food missing from their refrigerators. Propane tanks that were believed to be full were suddenly completely empty. Families kept pointing fingers at each other. They were sure none of them would do anything so trivial, which only added to the confusion. People drove themselves crazy trying to find an explanation for these mysterious happenings. Soon, things started getting menacing. Residents would notice little details such as scratch marks on door frames and chipped wood next to window locks. More things went missing. It was clear that North Pond was being burglarized. People changed their locks and installed security systems to no avail. They didn't know if it was one person or a group of people that were committing these crimes, and worse, if they were dangerous. For almost 30 years, North Pond residents felt haunted by something or someone, but they didn't know what or who. The citizens of North Pond were as vigilant as they could be. North Pond's a rural area, however, and permanent residents didn't live close enough to each other to be able to catch anything. Other cabins in the area were vacation homes that were vacant a majority of the time. Thefts were reported to local authorities, but they could do little to help. At one point, a resident posted a note on their door urging the burglar not to break in. The resident even offered to keep out whatever the culprits needed if they just let them know. There was never a reply. The robberies continued. Before the authorities could figure it out, a dangerous urban legend was born. As these burglaries raged on for decades, the person or persons responsible have become fodder for local legends. Ghost stories about the North Pond Hermit were swapped around the campfire. With no answers for so long, possible explanations for thefts have veered into myths. The North Pond Hermit was also called the Hungry Man, the Stealthy Yeti, or Maine's Loch Ness Monster. Local authorities tried everything to catch the North Pond Hermit over the years. 2 county sheriff's departments, the Maine State Police, and even the Game Warden Service conducted foot searches, flyovers, and even dusted fingerprints with no luck. But after so many years, Maine Game Warden Sergeant Terry Hughes became obsessed. He was determined to catch the hermit. With the help of Border Patrol agents, he installed top-secret Homeland Security equipment at the Pine Tree Camp at North Pond, where he often volunteered. Sure that the hermit would strike their kitchen in the off-season, he waited for about 2 weeks. On a brisk April night, just after 1 a.m., Hughes' motion detectors went off. The hermit was at the camp. Having had this moment planned down to a T, Hughes rushed out of his home and made it to the camp in about 4 minutes. He crept into the kitchen window to confirm his suspicions. He spotted a single man filling up his backpack. But the man was a little chubby and clean-shaven, not what he expected. Careful to be discreet so as not to scare off the burglar, Hughes quietly called for backup. He phoned Maine State Police Trooper Diane Vance, who'd also been chasing down the hermit for many years. He noticed the burglar head toward an exit different from where he'd entered. Knowing that the hermit often escaped without a trace, Hughes knew this would be his only chance to catch him. As the burglar slipped out of the dining hall, Hughes ambushed him. "Get on the ground!" Hughes bellowed. The burglar made no attempt to escape and did not resist arrest. Candy spilled out of his pockets as he lay face down. The North Pond Hermit was finally apprehended. Once Vance arrived, the North Pond Hermit was placed in handcuffs, and they sat him down for questioning. The man was strangely pale, wore outdated glasses, and had on some lightly worn winter clothes. He was clean, didn't smell, but had no identification. He refused to speak, so Hughes eventually left him alone with Vance. After they gave him water, he eventually started to talk. "My name is Christopher Thomas Knight," the man told Vance. She also learned that he was born on December 7th, 1965. He had no address or car, and he didn't pay taxes because he lived in the woods. Knight didn't know how long he'd been living in the woods. He stopped keeping track of months and years long before that. He did remember that the Chernobyl nuclear plant disaster happened just before he decided to leave for the woods. That was in 1986. Knight was only 20 years old back then. He was 47 by the time he finally got caught in 2013. Although it's a crime, it's pretty impressive that Knight got away with this for almost 30 years. He said he never broke in when someone was home and was careful to leave little to no trace. He only stole what was necessary: food, propane, clothes, reading materials. He did admit that everything he owned was stolen except for his eyeglasses, which were from the 80s. After looking him up in the system, Vance learned that Knight had no criminal record. He explained that he grew up in Albion, Maine, just under an hour away from where he was living in the woods. Investigators soon found Knight's senior picture in the 1984 Lawrence High School yearbook. He was wearing the same exact glasses he had on when they found him. Though Vance was sure that Knight was not dangerous, he was still arrested and charged with burglary and theft. That night, he was taken to the Kennebec County Jail, where he slept indoors for the first time in 27 years. It's a wonder why Knight decided to up and leave behind life as he knew it for a life of isolation in the woods. GQ journalist Michael Finkel exchanged letters with Knight and spent up to 9 hours visiting him in jail to learn his story, which was later recounted in a book, The Stranger in the Woods: The Extraordinary Story of the Last True Hermit. Knight told Finkel that he had a normal upbringing and good parents, but made a point to say that we're not emotionally bleeding all over each other. We're not touchy-feely. Stoicism is expected. Knight grew up with 4 older brothers and a younger sister. Before going into the woods, Knight's outdoors experience were from moose hunting trips with his father. They'd often sleep in the back of their pickup truck under the stars. He had good grades in high school, but was a bit of a loner. After graduating early, Knight followed his older brothers and enrolled in vocational electronics course at the Sylvania Technical School in Massachusetts. He then took a job installing home and vehicle alarm systems, skills that proved useful when he started breaking and entering. In 1985, Knight bought a brand new Subaru Brat, but he wouldn't be using it for too long. He quit his job after less than a year and drove back up to Maine, passing through his hometown without stopping. I drove until I was nearly out of gas. I took a small road, then a small road off that small road, then a trail off that, Knight told Finkel. After parking the car and leaving the keys in the center console, he was off. I had a backpack and minimal stuff. I had no plans. I had no map. I didn't know where I was going. I just walked away. Christopher Thomas Knight's life of solitude began in the summer of 1986. He started out by camping in one spot for about a week before continuing on hiking south. Eventually, he lost track of where he was. After roaming around for about 2 years, he found the perfect spot to settle in. Nestled between boulders and shaded by maple and hemlock trees, Knight's campsite wasn't noticeable if people were to pass by. You really had to search for it. He slept in a simple nylon tent that was covered with layers of brown tarp. Camouflage was key. At first, Knight was able to get by foraging for food. He ate roadkill and took vegetables from people's gardens. But he knew he couldn't sustain himself on vegetables alone, and that's when he resorted to stealing. I was always scared when stealing. Always. It was usually 1 or 2 a.m. I'd go in, hit the cabinets, the refrigerator, in and out. My heart rate was soaring. It was not a comfortable act, Knight added. I'm a thief. I induced fear. People have a right to be angry, but I have not lied. People were skeptical that Knight survived all these years sleeping outside. Some even suggested that he ought to have slept inside one of the cabins he broke into, maybe even used the bathroom. But he insisted that he never once did any of that. Knight's campsite was in a clearing that was about the size of a bedroom. He had an area for washing up, a nearby latrine and dump site, and a 2-burner stove. People couldn't believe that Knight survived the harsh winters out in the wilderness, but he did. He spent all of the fall season preparing for it, bulking up on stolen junk food and alcohol. Knight was careful not to leave traces of his presence anywhere he went. He'd scatter pine needles over borrowed canoes after using them, and was careful not to venture out in winter for fear of leaving footprints. He never even got sick or had to see a doctor for almost 30 years. You have to be around people to catch something. For almost 30 years, Knight truly had no contact with the outside world. The last time he encountered another human, he recalls, was in the 90s. He passed a hiker in the woods and merely said, "Hi." The only time he spoke to someone in 27 years. Knight spent months in jail while they decided what to do with him. A case like this had no precedent. Citizens who were affected by Knight's crimes had mixed emotions once the truth was revealed. For years, North Pond residents had lost their peace of mind, not knowing what or who was lurking out there. But once they found out about Knight, many of them were sympathetic. Even though they were victims in the case, sending Knight to prison was too cruel of a punishment for someone that really meant no harm and just wanted to be left alone. 6 months after his arrest, Christopher Thomas Knight appeared in court and pleaded guilty to 13 counts of burglary and theft. The Kennebec County Superior Court sentenced him to 7 months in jail, much of which was already served while they were deliberating his case. Knight was sentenced to 2 years of probation, meeting with the judge every Monday and abstaining from alcohol. Within this time, he found a job with his brother and stayed with his mother in the house he grew up in. No one really knows what's become of him now, since he wants to continue to live as invisibly as possible.